Are we about to see the Peyton Bowen breakout? And hey, them freshmen are living up to the hype. Coming up on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube, so go hit those subscribe buttons wherever you participate and partake of Locked On. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also hear him Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on the KREF Sports app. And Josh, this offseason is huge for a number of Oklahoma Sooners, but one of the guys that has garnered a lot of attention, for some time, even before he ever stepped on campus, is former five-star safety Peyton Bowen. Had a solid, freshman season for the Sooners. We saw some of that playmaking ability out in the open. Didn't have an interception, but on a number of occasions was pretty close to getting an interception for the Sooners. Showed a playmaking ability where he was able to track the ball in the air. Obviously, the punt blocking ability was crazy. But this is a dude that everybody's expecting now. Okay, year two, offseason 2, the breakout's coming for Peyton Bowen. But there's still a lot to learn for the guy who's now just in his second offseason with the Sooners.
Yeah, it's maybe easy to forget with Peyton Bowen that we're talking true sophomore, because he came in with all of that hype and talent, and from the moment he arrived, showcased that talent in last year's spring game for OU. But here's still a very, very young guy that now with 13 games played under his belt a season ago, a couple of starts, he was one of the top freshmen nationally in the country. Plenty of snaps, 36 tackles, 1 TFL, a sack, forced fumble, 5 PBUs. This should be when the light bulb fully comes on for Peyton Bowen. And alongside the rest of what Oklahoma has coming back in its secondary, namely Billy Bowman at the other safety position, we'll see kind of how Cheetah comes together for OU. But yeah, I think Peyton Bowen absolutely could be due for a breakout, and we probably should be expecting a breakout of sorts for Peyton Bowen. Now, what does that look like? Probably a couple of interceptions, right? We didn't see one of those. A couple of interceptions, though. That's not always the perfect indicator that somebody's doing or not doing their job in the defensive backfield. Every once in a while, that's just an opportunity presents itself, and you make the play or you don't. But more times than not, if you're a great defensive back, safety, whatever, you're probably going to come away with a couple, right? If you're constantly doing your job. So I would look to the interceptions number to improve for Bowen a little bit, and then the PBUs obviously as well. It's just overall understanding.
And I think that's the place where we see his game step up a little bit. Yes, he is going to be that guy that everybody's expecting to have a big season. Robert Spears-Jennings is back too. It's year 3 for him. He's ascended each and every year. We got Billy Bowman back. It's a really nice safety trio that Brent Venables and Zach Alley and Brandon Hall are going to be able to deploy out there. So even if Peyton Bowen is still kind of playing in a rotational role, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Developmental game. Billy Bowman, he played a variety of positions his freshman year back in 2021, and then played a lot at safety in 2022, but it was kind of an up and down roller coaster for him. And then 2023 had this breakout year that a lot of people thought, hey, he's going to be a top 100, top 50 pick in the NFL draft for the 2024 NFL draft, but decided to come back. Hey, there's nothing wrong with it being a little bit of a progression, as long as it is a progression. And I think we're going to see that out of Peyton Bowen. We're going to see him take another step forward in his development. And that's going to be huge for the Oklahoma Sooners defense, because as you continue to build up your secondary, which needed a big overhaul, from the Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch days, you had not a lot of depth available to you after, Delarian Turner-Yell and Patrick Fields went off. And then, You lost Key Lawrence, you lost a Reggie Pearson. Although those guys were here for a short time, they helped bridge the gap from the Alex Grinch days to the Brent Venables days on defense. And so this defensive secondary is developing. You're bringing in blue chip recruits and prospects all the time, but it's still, taking time to fully come to fruition. But I think we're going to see an even better version of it this next year, because we're going to see a better version of Peyton Bowen, and we're going to continue to see a better version of Billy Bowman and Robert Spears Jennings, not Reggie Pearson. Robert Spears Jennings. Had a brain fart in my own mind. So I'm excited, man. I think Peyton Bowen just got one of those natural abilities and natural instincts to play the ball. Brent Venables talked about it even last spring when he was coming onto campus, that football is just easy for him. It's a game that he just has a really good understanding for and a knack for. And that's going to get you a long ways, even if you might not be the most athletic, which he's really athletic, or the fastest, which he's really fast, or the most physical, which actually he's a pretty physical player. All of this is going to come together to where he could potentially be one of those guys that has an All-American season as a sophomore. I don't think that that's over extending expectations too much, because he does have all of the talent available to him to go have a big breakout year.
And theoretically, he's going to have some chances, because probably opposing offenses are going to think, if we can stay away from Bowman a little bit, maybe we stay away from Bowman a little bit. I don't know if they'll think like that, right? But you can play that theory around in your head a little bit, and it makes sense, because Bowman's Jim Thorpe type guy nationally for OU. So that means that for Bowen, or for whoever else would be in the mix, Robert Spears Jennings, others, that they're going to have an opportunity to go make some serious plays. So I do think that he's an easy candidate in the secondary for OU to really take some big steps forward. Year older, wiser, understands the defense. Physically, he's got to be in an even better place than he was at. Not that he was in a bad place, but just one full, trip around the sun, getting Schmitty-ified. He's probably in a pretty good place physically, I would imagine, right now. So, no, it's exciting, man. I think that obviously he's got the star capability about him, and now we just got to see him go deliver that on a regular basis.
And I think most people are expecting that to be the case, because you're going into a new conference. You got to have them. You got to have them step up, and you got to have them step up in a big way. You're going to see a lot of offenses that you've never really seen before, as far as personnel and what those tendencies are going to look like. You've seen Jeff Levy's, but you're not going to get to play them this year. So you need to have these guys continue to take those steps and develop. A few guys that are looking at taking big steps in year one for the Oklahoma Sooners. They're making it happen in the weight and strength and conditioning program. Let's talk about those guys coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball, it's in full swing, and FanDuel, it's your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet an automatic win. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Having to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Like if you're looking to see what all is going on with John Calipari, Kentucky and Arkansas, that interesting college basketball triumvirate, or you want national championship coverage from the women's or the men's game, that's where you want to go get it from your local experts here on Locked On. The freshman defensive tackles, David Stone, Jayden Jackson, they are the Peyton Bowen of this offseason. Peyton Bowen coming in 2023 had all of the hype, all of the expectations. He was the one, maybe next to Jackson Arnold, everybody was talking about, except with Jackson Arnold, you kind of knew he was going to be the backup quarterback to Dylan Gabriel. Peyton Bowen, you didn't know. I mean, you thought potentially he could ascend into a starting role. That didn't necessarily happen, although he did start a couple games. He did play a significant rotational role for the Oklahoma Sooners safety room and played some cheetah for you. Well, freshman defensive tackles David Stone and Jayden Jackson have been making a ton of noise already in spring ball for the Sooners, most notably in the strength and conditioning program as well, as they've gotten their weight up significantly. Jayden Jackson's up over 300 already. David Stone is 4 pounds shy of 300, as he posted on social media, I believe on his Instagram at one point. So things are really, really looking good. But in addition to that, they're proving that they're ready to at least play a rotational role as true freshmen for the Oklahoma Sooners defensive line.
Jayden Jackson's working with the Wands, and I'll just give proper credit where it's due. Teddy Lehman of the Ref, and Teddy Lehman of Butkus Award fame, Teddy Lehman of National Football League fame, and Teddy Lehman of the Oklahoma Breakdown podcast fame alongside Gabe Eichert, said that Jayden Jackson right now, to him, looks so incredibly advanced as a freshman, as in, John, it's fair for us to have a legitimate conversation about him starting for Oklahoma, not a rotational piece, a starter for Oklahoma. He's working with the ones. He right now, I think, was in front of DJ Terry and a couple of other folks out there. Grayson Halton was working in that group as well, though. But Jayden Jackson this is not some fake buzz. This is legitimate, serious buzz.
I'm gonna caution myself. I'm gonna cautionly optimistic myself, just because I've been the conductor of the Jayden Jackson hype train for more than a year now. I don't want this thing getting off the rails for me. I'm gonna let y'all run wild with the hype, because, hey man, if he's able to come in as a true freshman and start at defensive tackle, it gives you something. Now, you don't have a ton of talent and a ton of experience at defensive tackle beyond a Dejon Terry. We know what Dejon Terry is good at. He's a good run stuffing defensive tackle. You're going to have him out there on first down, second and long, or second and short situations, third and short, goal line. You're not going to get a whole lot from the pass rush perspective from Dejon Terry. And that's okay. That we just know what the limitations are. You don't have a Jacob Lacey, who you were expecting to take significant snaps for you this year. Grayson Halton needs to develop. He needs to continue to get better. But I'm not surprised at all by what we're hearing about Jayden Jackson. I mean, everything that is being said about him was true about him at IMG Academy. I mean, this is a dude that is a game wrecker. He played a lot of nose tackle, and so often that can kind of get overlooked because you're just getting mucked up a lot of times. You're taking on double teams. Well, this is a guy that's able to take on double teams, and because he plays with such good leverage and strength and quickness, he can defeat double teams pretty regularly, and I'm not going to say he's going to do it every single time, because that's a really tough task for anybody to do. But because of his size, his quickness, his strength, it's not surprising at all to me to see that he's running with the ones, that he's getting opportunities, and he could very well start. Now, are you ready to have a true freshman starting at defensive tackle? Are you going to be good enough everywhere else to overcome some of those expected freshman mistakes? We'll see. I think we do think that they're going to be good at defensive end. They're going to be good at linebacker, so that'll help. But, I mean, playing that nose tackle position is really, really tough. It's so tough, and it has a lot of responsibility attached to it, because you're not just out there trying to make plays for yourself, but you're trying to make it to where your guys are keeping clean around you. You're trying to make it to where guards aren't, climbing to the second level to take on Danny Stutzman and wash him out of the run play. It's a lot of responsibility to play that nose tackle role. But even if he's not playing that full time as a starter, I think he can still be a very, very productive player as that three technique, that defensive tackle that lines up between the guard and the tackle, because he's got that pass rush ability. He can provide some juice on the interior that you haven't had. And if he can do that, it's going to really help Oklahoma's defense take another step this season. But it's going to take some serious development between now and August for him to be a significant player for me. Now, everything sounds like it's trending in that direction, so I'm not going to doubt it one bit. But again, I also want to cautionally optimistic myself and say, hey, it's also tough as a true freshman defensive tackle. to make that kind of a jump.
Well, and I think what some will point to is, and I do think a lot of it's about Jayden Jackson, by the way, just off the top. But the other thing people are going to naturally point to is this a little bit of a commentary on Oklahoma's offensive line and where they're at right now? And that's maybe a debate for another day. But I'm here to tell you that based on the buzz you hear right now, barring injury, it's probably going to be pretty surprising if Jayden Jackson in some capacity is not a serious contributor for Oklahoma this season. So that's great. And that's what Oklahoma's been needing out of some of these young defensive line guys, and similar conversations we had about Peyton Bowen and some other guys defensively across the board for Oklahoma over the last couple of years. One other defensive line note that's kind of interesting for the last couple of days, John. Who do you think is working alongside Ethan Downs primarily as the one right now throughout the spring?
So if you're going surprising, I'm going to say Caden Woolard. Is that?
It's not Caden Woolard. That would have been definitely more surprising. This will be less surprising, but a nice surprise all the same. R. Mason Thomas is
my man.
Yeah, is somebody that has had a lot of hype, has had a lot of potential and flashes that he's put on film. And it sounds like right now, John, he's having a very, very good spring, which I would categorize in the realm of not super shocked to hear that. And, but, you know, having said that, very happy to hear it, because I do see R. Mason Thomas as somebody that has shown us that he has the ability to be not a good, a very, very good to great defensive end if it all clicks for R. Mason Thomas.
Well, Brent Venables last August or at some point during the season said during the summer camp, he was Oklahoma's best defensive lineman. That kind of praise doesn't come lightly from Brent Venables. And so there's a lot to like about R. Mason Thomas's game. I think he's got the juice that they just haven't had off the edge for a couple of years, you know, since Nick Bonito left. You know, Nick Bonito, Ronnie Perkins, those guys were able to provide some serious burst off the edge that could get them into the backfield and put pressure on the quarterback pretty quickly. Oklahoma hasn't really had that so far in Brent Venables' tenure as defensive coordinator, head coach. I guess he was never technically defensive coordinator, but under his defensive system, if R. Mason Thomas can stay healthy, I mean, that is the biggest key for him. Stay healthy all offseason so that you can simply develop and be ready to go week one and not having to, you know, battle through nagging injuries through the early part of the season and never really be able to showcase what you're capable of because you're sitting there week after week, doubtful, battling this little lingering issue and not able to get on the field full time. You got to practice and you got to play. That's how development happens. But we've seen the traits. We've seen just the explosiveness, the quickness that you want to have on the field, and you want to see continue to further move forward in his development, because that dude can be a dominant pass rusher if it all can click. It just hasn't clicked just yet, but it's a good thing you don't kind of just take the 1 year or 2 years and say, no, that's the player that you are. No, you take your time, you're patient, because that development's coming. And I think R. Mason Thomas, this is going to be the year that it kind of all clicks. I really hope so. I really, really hope so, because he's done everything that's been asked of him. He's been one of the harder workers for the defensive line room, and he's got all the talent in the world to be a really, really productive player off the edge.
No doubt. We've seen it, and pass rushing especially, I think he's got a chance to be incredibly special in that regard. And maybe it's putting the other puzzle pieces in place to where, we can trust you, from a contained perspective, and a number of other items to go along with the natural pass rushing ability. But I would put that in I'm excited to hear that category for R. Mason Thomas.
We got another analysis of the Oklahoma Sooners' future in the SEC compared to Texas. And I just don't get where people get off and what their thoughts are on the Oklahoma Sooners, or where they come to this conclusion. But man, Pete Mundo of Heartland College Sports had some thoughts on Oklahoma and Texas and their future heading into the SEC. And we're going to get into that coming up on Locked On Sooners. So Pete Mundo of Heartland College Sports had this to say about Oklahoma and Texas heading into the SEC. He says, if I'm looking at the former Big 12 teams, I'm like, Oklahoma concerns me a lot more about what their future holds in the SEC than Texas. If you told me this when these two teams announced they were leaving back in 2021, I would have said no way. But once again, here we are. Lincoln Riley's gone. Brent Venables is in. In large part, I think the jury is still out in some degree, and Steve Sarkisian has that thing humming down in Austin. Does he, though? Does Steve Sarkisian have that thing humming down in Austin? Because he's had one good year, finally, as a college football head coach. Because previously, his head coaching tenure, head coaching success wasn't all that great. But he finally gets Texas to a college football playoff. They lose to Washington in the semifinal. And hey, man, all things are roses down there in the Lone Star State for the Texas Longhorns, and they're not going to have any problems going to the SEC. I mean, shoot, the SEC, that's going to be nothing for Texas. They're going to be able to go in there and just run rampant on everybody. Don't worry about Georgia. Don't worry about whoever else, Mississippi State or Tennessee or Kentucky. It don't matter. We're the Texas Longhorns. They're just going to be able to do whatever they want to whoever they want because Steve Sarkisian has got it humming. Nah, man, I think Texas is in for a rude awakening going into the SEC as much as anybody, even as much as Oklahoma. But I think Oklahoma is just as set up to go and have success as the Texas Longhorns. And I'm getting so tired of this idea that Oklahoma is going to drop off because we're going to the SEC. At what point in 100+ years of college football has Oklahoma dropped off for any significant length of time?
The 90s.
Maybe the 90s. But then, guess what? 2 years after Bob Stoops arrives, they won a national title, and they've been, quote unquote, humming ever since. And maybe the jury is still out on Brent Venables for a lot of people, but I don't think that that's true for most people at this point. We've seen the development. We've seen the recruiting. It's coming together. The program is getting better year after year, and it's creating a more stable and more solid foundation than what they ever had under Lincoln Riley. That the recruiting wasn't great. All you had going for you under Lincoln Riley is 3 really epic years of quarterback play, or maybe 4 epic years of quarterback play with Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts with Lincoln Riley as head coach. But beyond that, you didn't really have a whole lot else. And so I'm done with this narrative, and I'm done with this idea that Oklahoma all of a sudden is going to drop off into becoming Kentucky, or to be a team like we're seeing the Florida Gators turn into all of a sudden. Nah, this is Oklahoma, where championships are the standard, and that standard doesn't change just because you're moving into the SEC. And the talent base that Oklahoma's working with moving into the SEC is on really, really strong footing, and they're recruiting at a level right there with Alabama, right there with Georgia, right there with Texas. And Texas has always recruited well. Finally, they were able to put the pieces together in 2023 to actually make a run and do something significant with themselves. But Oklahoma hasn't changed. It won't change. They're going to continue to contend, and they're going to be the team that, oh, man, I couldn't believe Oklahoma did that.
Well, first off, Pete Mundo, I think, or Mundo, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he does a very good job with Heartland College Sports. It's a good website. They've built it up, and it's a fun Big 12 sports news spot. I disagree with him wholeheartedly here, and for the more than anything, what you said off the top, which was, does Steve Sarkisian really have Texas humming? How quickly we forget who Texas was for the entirety of the last decade plus before really this past season where they made the college football playoff. It was a great year. By the way, that same season involved a loss to Oklahoma, by the way. But it was a wonderful season for Texas. They went to the college football playoff. You got Quinn Ewers back. They've, I think, restocked nicely out of the portal for their skill guys, but that still remains to be seen to some degree how well they have, in fact, stocked it back up and how it's all going to click and so on and so forth, right? Though I've got a sneaking suspicion that probably Steve Sarkisian, with a quarterback like Quinn Ewers, is for one more year going to do a better than solid job offensively, right? And they're going to call good plays, they're going to put up points, but the other parts of it, defensively, Is this going to be a Texas team that really intimidates you? Offensive line, are they going to bully you up front? I've got questions about each of those items. So my beef would be less about, okay, does Oklahoma's future in the SEC look a little murky? Why is everybody so confident in Texas's future in the SEC if you're unconfident in Oklahoma's future in the SEC? That's the part that I just I'm having a tough time wrapping my brain around.
And we go through this song and dance every offseason with the Texas Longhorns. This is the year that, hey, I'm back, or we're back. It's the year that they're going to go and finally, have that Big 12 title run. Every year we do this. Every single year. It's nonstop. And yes, it's the offseason. You got to find something to talk about. We're sitting here talking about Texas here as we sit on April the 9th. But I just don't get this. Like, okay, if you want to tell me that you're unsure of both Texas and Oklahoma's future in the SEC, I might be able to follow you on that train of thinking. But just to say that Texas is, they're fine. They're good to go. They got no issues. They have the SEC by the horns. It's going to be their conference and everybody else is living in it. But that just seems that, and I know maybe not everybody's going to that point, but it feels like that's the way everybody's going. Like, as Texas has some of the best odds to win the SEC and win the national title in 2024. And I'm like, why? But Oklahoma is, man, they're going to go to the SEC and they're going to struggle and it's going to be a rude awakening and they're going to be quote unquote the next Nebraska. Hint all the sarcasm in which I'm speaking with, because I find all of those narratives and all those talking points to be utter nonsense. Especially because this is an Oklahoma team that did beat Texas last year, Josh, as you mentioned. And this is an Oklahoma team that you've got Danny Stutzman for a game and a half against Kansas and Oklahoma State. And maybe you don't lose a game in 2023. You go back to the Big 12 title game with a rematch with Texas. Just small details. Maybe the referees call pass interference on Drake Stoops in the end zone against Oklahoma State in Bedlam. Maybe you're going to the Big 12 title game if they do the right thing and don't keep the flag in their pocket on a most egregious pass interference that I've ever seen. And I will never, ever let them forget it, Josh.
Don't let them live that down. Keep holding their feet to the fire. The bottom line is it's off-season fodder. And you kind of have to pick a side, I guess, right, to really generate interest and clicks and so on and so forth. So, and maybe that's just how Pete feels. Maybe he just genuinely feels that way.
A lot of people do. A lot of people feel that way.
A lot of people do, that Texas is in this great place. Again, I come back to have you guys forgotten what 5 years ago or like 3 years ago looked like? But apparently we have. So at any rate, Oklahoma will get its chance to decide it on the field. They got a bunch of talented guys back, and we'll see how this offense comes together and how this defense comes together for OU. There's reasons that we should be optimistic this defense is going to turn the corner and be excellent. And offensively, well, there's a lot of questions there for OU. But if they answer them, then okay, I think they got a chance to be pretty special.
Yeah, and I don't want to sit here and throw strays at Quinn Ewers because I think he's done a really nice job like managing all of the expectations that come with being that 5-star quarterback and being the guy that's so hyped up. I don't mind Quinn Ewers at all, and I don't hate his game necessarily, but I just don't think that he's risen to that level of no doubt superstar quarterback that you can rest all of your expectations for a team on. He's still going to have a lot of help at Texas. Much like, hey, this year in 2024, Jackson Arnold's going to have a lot of help too. That's just the reality of the situation for both these quarterbacks. But I think Oklahoma is in a position with the skill talent, with the defense that is going to be really, really good this year. And I think the offensive line is going to come together, that he has a chance to be just as good and just as impactful for the Oklahoma Sooners. And I think they're going to have a chance to go and do something special in 2024. I know a lot of folks want to look at 2025 as the year for them to actually contend. But dude, why not Oklahoma? Why not now? Why not in 2024? And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. They're free and available on all podcast platforms and YouTube. Follow Josh on Twitter at JoshOnRef, myself at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners. But until next time, he's Josh. I'm John. Boomer Sooner.